Imagine thousands of soldiers marching into battle, cities burning, families fleeing, all because of a wooden bucket. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like satire. But in 1325, two powerful Italian cities went to war in a conflict that history remembers as the War of the Oaken Bucket. And the truth is far more serious, political and fascinating than the legend suggests, because the war was never really about a bucket. The bucket was just the insult that symbolized something much bigger: power, pride, and centuries of political hatred. To understand this story, you have to go back to medieval northern Italy, a region filled with wealthy, fiercely independent city-states, constantly competing for influence. Two of those cities were Bologna and Modena. They were geographically close, but politically, they were enemies. For generations, these cities were divided by one of the most bitter political conflicts in medieval Europe, the struggle between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Guelphs supported the Pope, while the Ghibellines supported the Holy Roman Emperor. Bologna was a proud Guelph city, and Modena was firmly Ghibelline. This divide was not just about politics, it was about identity, religion, loyalty, and survival. Families were split, alliances hardened, and every conflict became part of a much larger ideological war. So when tensions rose between Bologna and Modena in the early 1300s, it was not random, it was inevitable. Contrary to the popular legend, the war did not start because someone stole a bucket and everyone suddenly decided to fight. The real causes were territorial rivalry and political competition. Bologna was one of the richest and most powerful cities in the region, with a large population, strong defences, and enormous economic influence due to trade and its famous university. Modena, while smaller, was strategically important and closely aligned with imperial power. For years, the two cities clashed over border territories, trade routes, and regional dominance in Emilia-Romagna. Raids, skirmishes, and provocations were common, and neither side wanted to appear weak. By 1325, tensions had escalated to the point where open warfare was almost unavoidable, and all that was needed was a symbolic spark. According to historical tradition, Modenese soldiers conducted raids into Bolognaise territory and eventually took a wooden bucket from a public well inside Bologna's walls as a trophy. The bucket itself had no military value, but its symbolic meaning was enormous. In medieval Italian political culture, stealing something from inside an enemy's city was a direct insult and a public humiliation. It sent a message that the city was vulnerable and that its enemies could reach its very heart. For a proud and powerful city like Bologna, that kind of insult could not simply be ignored. The bucket quickly became a symbol of mockery, defiance, and rivalry, and as the story spread among citizens and leaders, it inflamed anger even more. However, the deeper truth is that both cities were already on the brink of war, and the incident only intensified an already volatile situation. Bologna began mobilizing a massive army, preparing not for a minor retaliation, but for a full-scale campaign. Historical estimates suggest that Bologna gathered around 30,000 troops, an enormous force for a medieval city-state. Modena, by comparison, had far fewer soldiers, likely between 5,000 and 7,000 men. On paper, Bologna should have had the advantage with greater manpower, wealth, and resources. But medieval warfare was not determined by numbers alone. Modena had experienced commanders, strong Ghibelline support, and the advantage of fighting closer to their own territory. The decisive battle took place on November 15th, 1325, near the town of Zappolino. Bologna's forces advanced with confidence, expecting that their numerical superiority would secure an easy victory. Instead, the Modenese army launched a disciplined and aggressive counterattack. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Modena's troops managed to break the Bolognese lines, causing confusion and panic across the larger army. Once formations collapsed, retreat quickly turned into chaos. The result was a decisive and humiliating defeat for Bologna. Thousands of soldiers fled the battlefield, abandoning equipment and supplies as morale crumbled. This was not a symbolic skirmish, but a serious military upset that shocked the region. After their victory, Modenese forces pushed further into Bolognese territory, raiding surrounding areas and demonstrating their dominance. During these operations, the famous bucket became a celebrated trophy of war, reinforcing the narrative of humiliation. Over time, the story evolved into a simplified legend that the entire conflict had been fought over the bucket itself. In reality, the bucket was not the cause of the war, but a powerful symbol that represented rivalry, pride, and political hostility. The object was preserved in Modena as a civic trophy, and it reportedly remained there for centuries as a reminder of the city's unlikely victory. The legend grew even stronger in later centuries, especially after the 17th century satirical poem La Secchia Rapita, which dramatized and exaggerated the story for literary effect. This poetic retelling helped cement the idea that a massive war had been fought over a single stolen bucket, even though historians agree that the real causes were much deeper and rooted in long-standing political divisions and territorial disputes. The War of the Oaken Bucket demonstrates how small symbolic incidents can ignite major conflicts when tensions are already high. In medieval Europe, honor and reputation were critical to political power. An insult, especially a public one, could carry consequences just as serious as a military threat. For Bologna, allowing a humiliating act to go unanswered risked damaging its standing among allies and enemies alike. For Modena, the victory became a source of civic pride and a powerful narrative of defying a larger rival. Despite the dramatic battle and the intense rivalry, neither city was permanently destroyed, and both continued to exist and remain influential in the region for centuries afterward. However, the psychological and symbolic impact of the conflict endured much longer than the military campaign itself. The bucket, an ordinary wooden object with no intrinsic value, was transformed into one of the strangest war symbols in recorded history. The story survives today, not because of its strategic importance, but because of its narrative simplicity and irony. It is far easier for history to remember a war over a bucket than a complex political struggle between Guelph and Ghibelline factions, regional dominance, and medieval power dynamics. Ultimately, the War of the Oaken Bucket was not about an object, but about pride, rivalry, ideology, and reputation in a world where symbolic gestures could carry enormous political weight. Thousands of men marched, armies clashed, and lives were lost, not because the bucket mattered, but because what it represented mattered. It symbolized humiliation, defiance, and the ongoing struggle for influence between two rival city-states. The conflict serves as a reminder that many historical wars are remembered through simplified stories, while the real causes lie in deeper political tensions and human emotions. The bucket did not start the war, but it became the enduring symbol of a much larger battle for honor and dominance. And that is why, centuries later, one of the most unusual trophies in history still represents a very real and very serious medieval conflict.